जयो गोपी जन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी यशोदानंदन व्रज जनरंजन यशोदानंदन व्रज जनरंजन जमुना तीरा वनचारी जमुना तीरा वनचारी जयो राधा माधवा कुंज बिहारी जयो राधा माधवा कुंज बिहारी हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे जय राधा गोपीनाथ राधे जयो जगन्नाथ बलदेवा मैया सुभद्रा गौरानिताय जय गौरानिताय निताय गौर हरि बोल निताय गौर हरि बोल निताय गौर हरि बोल निताय गौर हरि बोल। हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय। ओम अज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूप कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरो श्रीयुतः पदकमलं श्रीगुरून् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातां सहगणा रघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनासहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधा कृष्णपादान् सहगणा ललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितंश्च नमो ओं विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिति नामने नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे वंशाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभैव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंदा हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 रामो राम रामो हरे हरे। Hare Krishna. So welcome all of you all for a weekly Gita class. So we have been discussing the fourth chapter of Bhagavad Gita. So we had started this discussion of the last section of the fourth chapter called sacrifice, right? So this starts from verse number 25 onwards. So we discussed verse 25 already. So in this section, Lord Krishna explains the various kinds of sacrifices. So we saw that in verse 25, Krishna explains two kinds of sacrifices. One is the sacrifice to the demigods. So he says people generally they perform various kinds of yagyas to satisfy a particular demigods in order to get their material desires. So this is one kind of sacrifice. So that's why you have in the Vedic scriptures people who are called Bahu Ishwaravadi, those who believe in many gods, right? So they worship various gods because the demigods are ultimately responsible for the things that we get in this world. So such kind of sacrifice is also allowed for people who can't fully practice pure bhakti. At least the scriptures say, "ठीक है, at least you do sacrifice to demigods." At least, at least the idea of sacrifice begins, and slowly you can elevate yourself towards the devotional service to Krishna. So this is one kind of sacrifice that is explained in text uh, 25. And the second kind of sacrifice is sacrifice to Brahman. So some people who sacrifice to the demigods, they sacrifice various ingredients. Like if you're performing a yagya for a particular demigods, you sacrifice ghee and various kinds of ahuti to that particular demigod. But those who perform yagya to achieve Brahma Jyoti, to achieve impersonal liberation, they sacrifice themselves only. They sacrifice their identity itself. So such people are called jnanis. So those who worship demigods are called karma kandis, and those who worship Brahma Jyoti or want to merge into Brahma Jyoti are called jnanis. Right? They want to lose their existence. But we saw how Srila Prabhupada explains that Krishna consciousness is the highest kind of sacrifice because a devotee sacrifices everything for Krishna. Manasa deho geho jo kichu mor arpilu tuva pade nanda kishore. And such kind of devotee, though he sacrifices everything for Krishna, the beauty is that a devotee doesn't lose his identity. He maintains his identity, he keeps his identity, and still surrenders to Krishna. But there are this kind of people who are jnanis who sacrifice their identity itself. So such people feel that because we have an individual identity, we are suffering. So let us finish the identity. Just like this example is given, if you have a headache, there are two ways in which you deal with headache. One is take a medicine and try to cure the headache. And the other medicine is cut the head only. So you may feel, I have a headache, let me cut the head. So the jnanis are like that. They feel, array, because I have this individual existence, I have to suffer. So better let me finish my existence only. But that's not the perfect understanding, right? The head is there for a purpose. If you have a headache, that's a diseased condition. Once you take the medicine, you can have, your head can function in a very proper way. So similarly, the Lord has created all of us. We have an identity so that we can maintain this identity and serve God. So in text 25, these two kinds of sacrifices are explained. Right? Now we'll read from text 26 onwards. Shrota indriyani anye samyagnishu juvati shabdadin vishayananya indriyagnishu juvati. Word to word, Shrota Adini, such as the hearing process. Indriyani, senses, Anye, others, Samyamya, of restraint, Agnishu, in the fires, Juvati, offer, Shabda Adin, sound vibration, etc. Vishayan, objects of sense gratification, Anye, others, Indriya, of the sense organs, Agnishu, in the fires, Juvati, they sacrifice. Translation: some, the unadulterated brahmacharis, sacrifice the hearing process and the senses in the fire of mental control, and others, the regulated householders, sacrifice the objects of senses in the fire of the senses. So here Krishna explains two categories of people: the brahmacharis and the grahasthas. So Srila Prabhupada first explains how in human form of life there are these four divisions: brahmachari, grahastha, vanaprastha, sannyas. Right? So these are called the four spiritual divisions, the four stages of life. So everyone begins as a brahmachari, as a student, under Gurukul, learning proper education, learning discipline. Then one may get married into Grahastha life, and then retirement, Vanaprastha, and then final sannyas. But Prabhupada explains whether one is a Grahastha or a Brahmachari or a sannyasi, Vanaprastha, the aim in life is to perfect one's life. Everyone is meant to become a perfect yogi. So it's not that the path of spirituality is only for brahmacharis and those who are in the renounced order, those who are monks. No, even grahasthas are supposed to practice spiritual life. Therefore, all these four, whether it is brahmachari, grahastha, vanaprastha, sannyas, all four are called ashram. So it's not that only brahmacharis live in ashram. Actually, everyone should live in ashram. Even a grahastha should make his house into a ashram. And what does ashram mean? Ashram means where the members staying in that house or in that building are taking ashray of God. That place is called ashram. So ashram is just not a building, right? It's just not. It's just not that few unmarried boys come together, bachelors come together, and they crash down in one place, and that's called an ashram. That's not an ashram, right? Ashram means where the members in that respective place are taking shelter of Krishna, and everyone is supposed to do it because this human form of life is given for perfection for everyone. So it's not that only brahmacharis can become perfect, even grahasthas can become perfect. That is why Lord Krishna chooses Arjuna to be the recipient of Bhagavad Gita. Who is Arjuna? Arjuna is not a brahmachari. Arjuna is not a sannyasi. Arjuna is a grahastha. He has wives, he has children. He's a responsible man. So Krishna purposely chooses Arjuna to tell all of us that everyone is meant for perfecting one's life. So the path of yoga, bhakti yoga, is meant for everyone. Because this human form of life is not meant to enjoy like animals. It is not meant to enjoy. That is why Rishabdev, in his teachings to his sons, he explains, Nayam deha deha bhajam daloke, kashtan kamam harhate vidbujam ye, tapo divyam putrakayena sattvam, shuddhyet yasmat brahma saukyam to anantam. So he's telling his children, my dear children, sense gratification, eating, sleeping, mating, defending, is available to the animals also. The camels also do it, the dogs also, the horses also do it. Human form of life is meant to do tapasya, is meant to follow the path of yoga, so that one can achieve Krishna. Brahma Saukyam to Anantam, to achieve the highest kind of pleasure. So someone may be inclined to brahmachari life, someone may be inclined to grahastha life. But both of them should practice spiritual life. That is why Bhaktivinoda Thakur in his song he explains, Grihe tako, vane tako, sada hari bhole tako. He explains whether you are a grahastha, living in a house, living in a city, or you are a vanaprastha or a brahmachari living in a forest. Wherever you are, what you should do? Sada hari bhole tako. Whatever your condition is, chant Hare Krishna. Practice bhakti. This is the essence. We don't have to change our occupation. We don't have to change our position. We have to change our consciousness. And the consciousness is Krishna consciousness. So that's why Srila Prabhupada named the society as International Society for Krishna Consciousness. We have to change our consciousness into Krishna consciousness. So you have these categories of people. So technically the brahmacharis and the grahasthas. So for the brahmacharis, what is recommended? The sacrifice that the brahmacharis are supposed to do is the sacrifice of hearing, Shravan. So here it says the brahmacharis sacrifice the hearing process and the senses in the fire of mental control. So just like you have in Yagya, you have a fire and you put ahuti in it. Correct? You have a fire and then you put ahuti. So for brahmacharis, the fire is mental control, right? Mental control is the fire. And what do you sacrifice? What is the ahuti you put? The hearing process, Shravan, and the senses. That means with your controlled life and your proper hearing, Shravan. That's why when Raghunath Das Goswami, one of the great acharyas in our sampradaya, when he took to the renounced order of life, when he took to sannyas order, he went and asked Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, what is the duty of one in the renounced order? What is the duty of a brahmachari or sannyasi? So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, Gramya Kata na kahibe, Gramya Kata na shunibe. So someone who's in the renounced order should not speak things unrelated to Krishna, and one should not hear things unrelated to Krishna. So brahmachari means he is always engaged in hearing about Krishna. Shravan. This is the basic principles. And Prabhupada explains here, a pure brahmachari engages fully in Harer Namanu Kirtanam. Continuously chanting the holy names, hearing about Krishna. This is the basic principle. And what happens when you do this? When you do hearing properly, your conviction about how this material world is a place of misery, how one can control one's senses, all these convictions come by hearing. That is why for all of us, this hearing is a very, very important aspect in spiritual life, right? So we may get diverted, there are so many temptations and so many allurements in this world. We may naturally get diverted around, but it is important that we regularly hear. So when we keep coming back to the process of hearing, so it's not like a one-time process. You have to keep hearing this. Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. When you keep coming back to the process of hearing again and again, what comes? Realization comes. We were discussing yesterday, the Bhagavatam first canto, Narad Muni is telling Vyasdev his previous life. So we all know the life of Narad Muni. So apparently today is the disappearance day of Shrivas Thakur. So Shrivas Thakur is one of the members of the Panchatattva. So we chant this Panchatattva mantrana, Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. So Shrivas Thakur is one of the members of the Panchatattva. And Shrivas Thakur is explained to be the incarnation of Narad Muni. And what is the life of Narad Muni? Narad Muni is continuously chanting the names of Krishna. This is his only business. He doesn't go for a 9 to 5 job. He doesn't do all these things. The only thing that he is doing is preaching. Full-time preaching. Around the entire universe he goes and preaches. But how does Narad Muni become Narad Muni? How does he get this celestial and transcendental body where he is continuously engaged in the service of the Lord? So Narad Muni tells his own story to Vyasdev. So Narad Muni, in the previous day of Brahma, he was a son of a maid servant. But what happened was, he for 4 months, the great sadhus, Bhakti Vedantas, they had come to the house of Narad Muni, and Narad Muni as a young child heard scriptures from them very attentively. And because he heard very attentively, he got realization, he got maturity. So maturity comes, one way of getting maturity in life is experiences, right? So when you go through the different experiences in life, you gain maturity. But the easier way of getting maturity is hearing. If you hear about mature people, naturally you will get maturity. So Narad Muni became so mature. This is the story of his previous life. As a 5-year-old boy, his mother, only mother, he didn't have a father also. The mother died due to a serpent bite. But this 5-year-old boy was so detached, so mature. He had such realization. He saw this as the mercy of God. He didn't start to curse his life. He thought, the Lord is just cutting all my attachments. He just walked straight towards the Himalayas. Right? So this is the life of Narad Muni. So why I'm telling you this point is because when we engage in the process of hearing, which is the duty of a brahmachari, naturally realizations come. Naturally it comes because the process of hearing is very, very powerful. So this is the sacrifice for the brahmacharis. What is the sacrifice? The sacrifice of hearing. Sitting for the classes and hearing. This is the most important aspect, right? So the next thing that Krishna explains here, what is the sacrifice for a grahastha? The sacrifice for a grahastha is regulated enjoyment, right? So a grahastha has license for enjoyment. Like Prabhupada explains here, in this material world, everyone is inclined, the tendency to enjoy the opposite sex is there, naturally. So that's why in our Vedic scriptures, you have marriage, the institution of Vivaha Sanskar, marriage, where you enjoy, but in a regulated fashion. So when a grahastha, when someone decides to enter into the grahastha ashram, he is given license to enjoy, but not unrestricted enjoyment. It is very regulated. It is for a particular purpose and a very regulated enjoyment. So such kind of enjoyment is called yagya. Even such kind of enjoyment by a grahastha in a very regulated, according to scriptures, in a very dharmic way, is called yagya. So what does a grahastha do? What is the sacrifice? He sacrifices the objects in the fire of the senses. The senses are compared to the fire, right? Lust is compared to that fire, and he sacrifices the various objects in it. So the grahasthas are allowed to enjoy, but in a very restricted way. So Prabhupada, Krishna in this verse explains these two kinds of sacrifice. One is sacrifice by the Brahmacharis, and their sacrifice is the sacrifice of hearing, the yagya of hearing. And the sacrifice for the grahasthas is they also engage in hearing definitely, but they are allowed a little license for enjoyment. So now in the next sloka, Krishna explains another kind of sacrifice, which is called sacrifice by yoga. Sarva indriyani karmani prana karmani chapare atma samyamya yogagno juvati jnana deepite. Word to word, sarvani of all, indriya the senses, karmani the functions, prana karmani functions of the life breath, cha also, apare others, atma samyamya of controlling the mind, yoga the linking process, agno in the fire of, juvati offer, jnana deepite because of the urge for self-realization. Others who are interested in achieving self-realization through control of the mind and senses, offer the functions of all the senses and of the life breath as oblations into the fire of controlled mind. So this refers to the Patanjali yoga system, right? The Patanjali Ashtanga Yoga Marga. So such kind of yogis, this is also kind of yagya. They offer the mind, the control of the mind, the senses, and the life breath, prana, into the fire of mind control. So Srila Prabhupada in various places has always explained this point. Whether you're doing bhakti yoga or any other yoga, the principle of yoga is to control the mind. This is the central pivot of the yoga system, right? And in the yoga system, we all know the life air, prana, is very, very important, because the scriptures explain how in our body there are 10 kinds of air, various kinds of airs in our body, right? So we see that the blood flows from one part of the body to another. There is various kinds of movements that go on. Our hands move, legs move. There is coordination among the muscles, the bones. All this is because of a subtle element of prana, air, right? So therefore, in Ayurveda, you have these three principles: kapha, vata, pitta. So there, vata refers to air. When there is imbalance of air in the system, there are various kinds of diseases like arthritis, all this bone issues, right? Pains in the body is because the air in the body is like dearranged basically, right? So air is very, very important. So how is pranayam connected to spirituality? What is the connection? So that's why it is explained here. The soul, it functions around this 10 air. The soul is almost like floating in this different kinds of air in the body. So when we regulate the air in the body, automatically there is an amount of mind control. The mind becomes peaceful, and spiritual thoughts naturally come. So that's why pranayam, deep breathing, has a connection. It has a connection with spirituality. It can actually pacify the mind. So Prabhupada explains in the purport, according to the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, there are two kinds of atmas. One is called pratyag atma and the other is called paragatma. So what is paragatma? Paragatma means when a person is attached to sense gratification, he is called paragatma, still attached to the things of this world. And when someone becomes detached from the things of this world, he is called pratyag atma. So what is the purpose of Ashtanga Yoga? Prabhupada explains here, the purpose is to from Paragatma, one has to go towards Pratyagatma. That is the goal of life. And what does Pratyagatma means? He has controlled sense gratification. His mind and senses are little controlled because the senses naturally want to crave for enjoyment. Right? The eyes want to see something beautiful. The ears want to hear something that is gratifying to the ears. Right? The tongue wants to taste something that the tongue likes. Right? So we all are the senses that are constantly moving outwards. But the path of yoga is to look within. Introspection, contemplation is the path of yoga. Right? So this is called self-realization. So right now we feel the self will become complete when I enjoy. But when we practice yoga, even the path of pranayama, we gradually realize the real self is within and we try to become a little more peaceful. Right? So this is the purpose of yoga. The purpose of yoga, I mean, just few days ago was International Yoga Day. But people feel that yoga day, the contribution of India is yoga. And what do people think yoga is? Asana and pranayama. People feel that this is the end of yoga, the means and end of yoga. But this is not the conclusion of yoga. These are just two small parts of this Ashtanga yoga system. But the purpose of yoga is self-realization. This is the purpose. So Srila Prabhupada explains here in the purport. So the aim, even if someone is following this path of Yoga Yagya, his aim is to become Pratyag Atma. Pratyag Atma means one who has controlled his sense gratification. Now in text 28, Krishna explains few other systems of Yagya. So till now, we saw 25, 26, 27. Till now, Krishna has explained various kinds of Yagya. The first he explains Yagya, sacrifice to the demigods. Second is sacrifice to Brahma Jyoti, sacrificing your identity in the fire of Brahma Jyoti. The third he explained was for the Brahmacharis, the sacrifice of wearing. For Gragastha, the sacrifice of regulated enjoyment. And this verse that we saw now, text 27, he explains the sacrifice of yoga. Now in 28, he explains few other kinds of sacrifice. Dravya yagyas tapo yagya yoga yagyas tatapare swadhyaya jnana yagyascha yataya samshita vrata. Dravya yagya, sacrificing one's possession. Tapaha yagya, sacrifice in austerities. Yoga yagya, sacrifice in eightfold mysticism. Tata, thus, apare, others. Swadhyaya, sacrifice in the study of the Vedas. Jnana yagya, sacrifice in advancement of transcendental knowledge. Cha, also. Yata yaha, enlightened persons. Samshita vrata, taken to strict vows. So the translation is like this. Having accepted strict vows, some become enlightened by sacrificing their possessions, and others by performing severe austerities, by practicing the yoga of eightfold mysticism, or by studying the Vedas to advance in transcendental knowledge. So here Krishna explains few other kinds of sacrifices. The first is called Dravya Yagya. Dravya Yagya means sacrificing things. Dravya means the possessions that we have. So all of us in life have certain possessions, right? And we are very attached to the things of this world. But when we practice this Dravya Yagya, we give in charity. So Prabhupada explains here how generally even in India and even in outside countries, the system of charitable institutions is there. That is why traditionally you'll find all the traditional business communities of India, whether it is the Tatas, the Birlas, all of them have a charitable institution. Some part, or even like a major part of their income goes in charity. They either start hospitals or anath ashrams, right? Or Atiti Shala, yeah, Anna Kshetra, different kinds of charity through which they are offering whatever possessions they have, the money, the skills, they are offering that in charity. So this is called Dravyamaya Yagya, right? So this is also, it's a good type of sacrifice because the idea of giving has started. Krishna, in the 10th canto, this very beautiful verse comes where Krishna is glorifying the trees of Vrindavan. So he says, Etavan janma safalyam dehinam iha dehishu praner arte diya vacha shreya acharanam sada. So Krishna is saying, just look at these trees. The tree, the life of a tree is a life of giving. The tree is always giving. The tree is giving fruits. The tree is giving shade. The tree gives its own wood. The tree is practically giving flowers, so many things. So Krishna says, just look at this tree. If the tree is giving so much, as humans, we should also be able to give. And what we should give? Praner arte diya vacha. Four things that we can give as humans. First is prana. We can offer our entire life in the service of others. That's one way. If you can't do that, praner arter, you can give your money. Right? Giving money is difficult because people are so attached to what they have earned, through their own hard work. So you can part away with your money, charity. That's also a way of giving. And then praner arte diya. Diya means body. You can do physical service to others. You can try to help them in some way. And at least, if nothing, vacha. You can speak kind words to others. You can speak encouraging words to others. This is also kind of sacrifice. So Krishna is basically encouraging all of us to at least sacrifice something for the welfare of others. So such kind of people who sacrifice things fall in the category of dravyamaya yagya. Right? This is also a kind of yagya. The next kind of yagya is called tapo yagya, sacrifice by austerity. Right? And Prabhupada gives here example. The many people who do like severe austerities. Right? Recently we went for this Chardham Yatra. People do so much sacrifices to go for these yatras. Right? So many people literally they are walking for like kilometers and kilometers. And it's not easy to walk barefoot. there's a lot of sacrifice. There's a lot of austerity involved. Yeah, some people follow Chaturmas. Like now rainy season is coming now. Very soon the Chaturmas will start, the 4 months of rainy season. So many people follow strict austerities during this rainy season. They don't eat, they just eat probably once a day, right? Or some khichdi for this 4 months. Some people don't shave for the 4 months. There are different kinds of austerities, right? So what happens by doing this? By doing this, you get some amount of renunciation, some amount of realization gradually comes. So this is called tapo yagya, performing austerity. Then there is, we saw yoga yagya, we have already seen. Yoga yagya means the system of mysticism, right? Ashtanga yoga, right? So we have already discussed this. The next is swadhyaya yagya, swadhyaya jnana yagya, sacrifice by study. So you have a lot of people who are like very intelligent, very scholarly. So that's why in the Vedic times, there would be people who would learn the Vedas, the Vedanta Sutras, the Upanishads, Sankhya philosophy. So such people, they are performing a yagya called Swadhyaya Yagya. They are getting enlightenment by studying. They sacrifice their intelligence in the scriptures, right? So these are the various kinds of yagya Krishna explains. And then Prabhupada mentions here, so ultimately all the different kinds of yagyas and all the different kinds of yogis that Krishna has explained here, ultimately they are seeking higher status in life. What is the purpose of sacrifice? The purpose is I will give something so that in future it will benefit me. Right? That's the whole idea. But Prabhupada also mentions this point, how Krishna consciousness or bhakti yoga is different from all of these. Why? Because bhakti yoga is the supreme. Just by performing bhakti yoga, one performs all the different yogas automatically. Just like in the process of Krishna consciousness, by performing bhakti, swadhyaya also happens. Just like we are discussing these classes come under the category of swadhyaya. We are doing our scripture study. Swadhyaya happens automatically. Charity happens automatically, right? So all these kinds of yagya, hearing happens automatically. So all these kinds of yagya automatically happen. Like Prabhupada would give this simple example. If you have like a 1,000 rupee note, that 1,000 rupee note contains 1 rupee note, 1 rupee coin, 100 rupee note, 10 rupee note, everything it contains, all the denominations. Similarly, Bhakti Yoga contains all the different yogas. But if you are practicing the other kind of yogas, it doesn't mean that you're practicing bhakti. There are two different things. So that is why Bhakti Yoga is the highest. And Prabhupada explains here, Bhakti Yoga can be attained only by the mercy of Krishna and his devotees. I was just reading Chaitanya Charitamrita. It is explained there, this is Brahmaji Shloka, which comes in the Bhagavatam, that only one who has the mercy of Krishna can practice Bhakti Yoga. Brahmanda Brahmite Kon Bhagyavan Jeev, Guru Krishna Prasade Pahai Bhakti Lata Bij. You may be able to perform Tapomai Yagya, Swadhyaya Yagya, but to perform Bhakti Yoga, one definitely requires mercy of Krishna, and that too mercy of Krishna that comes through association of devotees. So all of us, we are very fortunate in Krishna consciousness that we have got this highest kind of yoga, the process of Bhakti Yoga, through the connection that we have had to devotees. So in this way, in text 28, Krishna explains these few kinds of yoga. Now in 29, again he comes to the point of sacrifice by pranayam. Apane juvati pranam, prane panam tatapare, pranapana gate rudva, pranayama parayana, apare niyatahara, pranan praneshu juvati. Word to word. Apani, in the air which acts downward, Juvati offer. Pranam, the air which acts outward. Prane, in the air going outward. Apanam, the air going downward. Tata, as also. Apare, others. Prana, of the air going outward. Apana, of the air going downward. Gati, movement. Rudva, checking. Prana, pranayama, trance, included by stopping all breathing. Parayana, so inclined. Apare, others. Niyata, having control. Ahara, eating. Pranan, the outgoing air. Praneshu, in the outgoing air. Juvati, sacrifice. The translation is like this. Still others who are inclined to the process of breath restraint to remain in trance, practice by offering the movement of the outgoing breath into the incoming breath into the outgoing, and thus at last remain in trance, stopping all breathing. Others, curtailing the eating process, offer the outgoing breath into itself as a sacrifice. So, this is the next category of people who are pranayama parayana. So, parayana means inclined or devoted. So, all of us in Krishna consciousness, we are trying to become Narayana Parayana. We are trying to become attached or devoted to Krishna. But there are a lot of people who have great faith in the process of pranayama. Pranayama Parayana. They are like almost like worshippers of pranayama. You know, they have complete control of this breath, which is good. So the idea is you control the various kinds of air in the body. So Prabhupada explains in the purport in detail. There is an air, in our body. So these are like yoga terminologies. So in our body, there is an air that goes upward, downward, which is called apana air. And there is an air that goes upward called prana. Apana, prana. So in the process of pranayam, someone who's like very expert in pranayam, he starts to reverse this process of breathing. He starts to reverse the air currents in the body to such an extent that it reaches a stage of equilibrium, right? And this is called, the state of equilibrium is called puraka. And then there is rechaka and then kumbhaka. Kumbhaka means almost you almost like put a stop to the breathing. It's almost pacified. So what happens, Prabhupada explains here, by doing this, yogis prolong their life. If you go to Kumbh Mela happens like once in few years. If you go to Kumbh Mela, you will find yogis who have lived for hundreds of years. You will find a yogi who has lived for 200 years, 300 years, actually living in this world. How is it possible? Because they have regulated their breathing. So what is our lifespan? We may say, my life is 80 years, 70 years. But actually, see, our body is like a machine. Just like in olden days, you would have this toy, वो चाबी का toy होता ना, you trigger that toy, that key, how many ever rounds you do of that key, that many times the toy will walk and then it will stop. So similarly, our body is like a machine. Yantra Rudani Maya. Krishna explains our body is like a machine. And how is this machine governed? How long the machine will go? The number of breaths. The heart, the number of breaths it takes is fixed. Just like a body now. A machine that when you make, you can tell this machine is going to last, or like a car, this car will last for so many kilometers. That's it. After that, it's going to break down. So similarly, our body, the number of heartbeats of our body is fixed. That means the number of breaths is fixed. So what the yogis do, the number of breath is fixed. So they control their breath. They prolong each breath. So when you prolong each breath, then what happens? Your lifespan increases. So by doing pranayama, many people, that's why the idea is that you can have a long life. Why? Because you regulate your breathing instead of breathing very fast, right? So when you're very anxious or completely always in stress, the breathing is always very fast breathing. So when the breathing is very fast, your lifespan actually reduces. So the yogis, they increase their lifespan by controlling their breath, right? But Prabhupada again makes this point: a Krishna conscious person is situated above these yogis. For such a person, a yogi controls his senses, controls his mind by the process of pranayama, but a devotee naturally controls all of them by Krishna consciousness. And a devotee is not even interested in increasing lifespan. I mean, what is the use? Like the Bhagavatam explains, you have trees, the banyan trees or trees like this, which live for hundreds of years, thousands of years. But what is the value? So better, even if you have a short life, but if you have a life that is devoted to Krishna, that is perfect. Just like you have the example of Parikshit Maharaj, he lived a short life, but completely focused on Krishna. He perfected his life. You have the example of Abhimanyu, lived only 16 years, but in 16 years he served the Pandavas, served Krishna perfectly, perfected his life. So therefore, a Krishna conscious devotee, he focuses on the most important thing, bhakti to Krishna. Narayana Parayana. So Prabhupada quotes a verse from Bhagavad Gita, 14 chapter, 26th verse. Mamchayo vebicharini bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samitityaitan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. When one engages in unalloyed bhakti, that means pure bhakti, he is immediately elevated to the spiritual platform. That is his perfection. And then there is also a mention here, so some of the yogis, they control their eating process. So when you control your eating process also now, your life increases. So many times we feel that we need food to live, but actually there are yogis who live only by air. If you know how to breathe properly, you actually can reduce your intake of food. So you don't need too much food to live. So this is like a proven medical fact. People die more of overeating than undereating. You'll find more people dying of obesity, overeating than undereating. Undereating is not a problem if you know how to regulate your life. The body doesn't need too much food, right? So people, the yogis, basically they control their eating. But Prabhupada again explains the Krishna conscious devotee, his eating is automatically reduced. Why? Because he eats only what is offered to Krishna. So the first principle of a devotee is, am I eating prasad? That is the principle. So if you follow this, your eating is automatically regulated. So in this way, a devotee perfects his life, controls his mind, controls his senses by practicing Krishna consciousness. So we will stop at this point. From text 30, we will do the next time. Anyone has any questions, any comments? Any questions, any comments? Okay. So if no questions, we can just have like a small discussion just to find out how everyone's spiritual life is going on.